Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case where a man suffered needlessly due to police overreaction. My client, Mr. Ramirez, used to be a carpenter by trade. He has a family and enjoyed spending time with his family and playing basketball with his son. However, due to his contact with Officer Levy and Waldman, he is no longer able to play basketball with his son or earn a living as a carpenter. On December 7th, 1996, my client, Mr. Ramirez, was having a party at a friend's house. They got together to watch an NBA game and shared a six-pack together while they were doing it. Afterwards, they played rummy together. And then they decided that they would go to a couple of bars to finish off their night. Well, they went to the bars and in each bar they drank a couple of scotch and waters each. And yeah, they just had a fun time hanging out together. And then they decided they would round off the evening by going down to the park and having a race. Now my client, Mr. Ramirez, he used to be a very active athletic man and he won the race. Then the friends decided that they would go back to the friend's house so that everyone could pick up their cars and go back home. So when they got there, Mr. Ramirez bade his friends goodbye and then hopped into his car and drove away. Now while he was driving back to his house, he saw a vehicle in front of him that was acting very, very strangely. You see, the car was driving really slow, probably around 10, maybe 15 miles per hour, and it seemed to be driving very erratically, so Mr. Ramirez didn't really want to overtake it for fear he would get into an accident. So he started flashing his lights and tooting his horns, trying to get the other car to pull over so that he didn't run any risk by overtaking it. Now, the car wasn't marked in any special way. It was just a normal car so far as Mr. Ramirez thought. Now, Mr. Ramirez was getting more and more frustrated the longer he was behind this car, as you do when you're behind a slow car and can't overtake. But eventually the car drove off to one side and Mr. Ramirez followed the car and wound down his window to give the man driving the car a piece of his mind, because at that stage he was very frustrated and very angry. Well, the man in the other car started getting out. Now, he was just dressed ordinarily. He had no uniform on or nothing to suggest he was a policeman. And Mr. Ramirez got out too so that he could, be face to face with this guy when he's telling him what for. So they come together and they're yelling at each other. And then Officer Levy hits my client and then they start a big fight. Now, at first my client seems to be getting the better of it because he had knocked Officer Levy down, but then Officer Levy hit my client in the stomach and he went down too, and they started rolling around together having a grand old tussle. But eventually Officer Levy got the better of it and had my client on his back, and Officer Levy was on top of him. Well, then suddenly Officer Levy said, "Police, police." And my client was fairly surprised about that, because you don't usually expect policemen to, be shouting abuse at you and then to hit you and then get into a fight with you. And of course, no, their car didn't have any police sign on it or wasn't painted the police colours, and Officer Levy and Officer Waldman weren't dressed in their police clothes, police uniforms. So my client asked for some identification. Officer Levy got off him and reached into his pocket to pull out some identification, and Mr. Ramirez started getting up too. But then he was shot in the back by Officer Waldman, and the next thing he knew, he was in a hospital bed. He spent almost 2 months in that hospital bed recovering. And even now, he still can't work properly because of the damage that was done to him by the bullet that Officer Waldman shot. His injury interferes with him lifting heavy objects or even lighter objects. And in his trade as a carpenter, he needs to lift a lot of things, so he can no longer properly work. Also, he can't play basketball with his son anymore because his back is so badly damaged by the shot. Now, Officer Levy and Waldman will tell you that my client had a knife, but my client has never owned a knife like this, nor has he even seen this knife. The only knife that he has that's remotely similar to this is a filleting knife, but the filleting knife's blade doesn't close like this one does. It's a fixed blade and can't be shut. Officer Levy and Waldman also say that my client stabbed Officer Levy and he was holding the knife in his right hand, but my client is left-handed. Officer Waldman and Levy will also tell you that the knife was closed after when Mr. Ramirez fell on the ground. It was closed while he was falling. But this type of knife, the blade doesn't shut unless you press this button to make it shut. And there's no way that it could have pushed that button while it was falling to the ground when Mr. Ramirez dropped it after he had been shot. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm not saying that my client is totally innocent in this matter. He did make mistakes. He shouldn't have got out of his car, and he shouldn't have been shouting abuse at Officer Levy and Waldman. And he shouldn't have got into a fight with Officer Levy. But should he be punished by being permanently disabled? Did he deserve to be shot in the back? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.